I hope that this is kind of what it remains like for the rest of the series. It's really felt like he's stepped into like what is his own world, whereas I think the previous 3 books, for the most part, felt familiar to me. He's kind of evaluated like, what do I like about the series? What do I want to focus on? And like, where do I want to take it going forward?
Welcome, friends, to episode 343 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And this week we discuss the first half or so of Robert Jordan's 1992 book, The Shadow Rising. All right, James, so we are here in book 4 of The Wheel of Time, which for my money is one of the best. I was thinking about it today. I think this is among my favorites in the series. It is certainly entering a run of books here, which I think are some of the strongest. Again, I've read some of these books twice, most of them only once, and I haven't read the final book. So I'm at like a weird spot with the series. So for context, but like I really, really like The Shadow Rising, and the first half of it is a lot of fun for me. We're gonna do some general thoughts here first. I've read, just for in case anyone cares, we've read the first 34 chapters of this, which is a little over half. So we have not read the full book yet. We haven't watched any of season 3 of the show, which we're going to do next week. So we're going to try and talk a little bit general early, then we'll get into some spoilers for what we've read. But we don't know how far the show has got. So if you're a show-only watcher, I guess be aware we might talk about some stuff that hasn't happened in the show yet. Hard to know. Anyway, all that set aside, how are you liking the start of The Shadow Rising so far?
This is it. I feel like I finally broke through the wall to where like I feel like I'm a fan of the series now.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have that reaction to this book. This is like the one that really gets them.
Like I can't say that any of the previous 3 that we've read were among my favorite fantasy books. We're about halfway into this, and I'm starting to think like this is pulling me in every direction. I love what he's doing with each of the characters. Anytime that he's introducing kind of what I can see as like the path that the character is going to go on for this book, I'm like, oh, that's so cool. That's going to be such a great thing to see. And I can't wait to see that fleshed out. Mm-hmm. And like a lot of it is exceeding my expectations, even knowing that. And I just feel like, especially with the groundwork that Dragon Reborn did, book 3.
Yeah, which we read last week, by the way.
Yeah.
If anyone's curious about our thoughts on that one.
It did a lot to set up these other characters like Perrin, Matt, the trio of Aes Sedai.
Yeah, it was kind of some necessary character work for what we get here, even though, admittedly, in retrospect, it looks like not a lot happened in that book.
Well, I would say, too, in this book, it feels like not a lot has happened so far plot-wise in this story. I mean, things are happening for sure.
Not a lot has resolved. There's been a lot of movement in the plot, I would say, but a lot of it is still open. It's like none of it has resolved yet.
Yeah, and it feels like a lot of like gearing up to like what Perrin's about to do and what Rand is about to do, like a lot of that happening. And we've got some crazy lore bombs for sure that I'm just like, oh my God, like stuff that we were talking about way back in book 1, Eye of the World, with Wheel of Time.
I wonder if this is the point where Robert Jordan realized or started to conceive of the actual epic size and scale of the series he was going to tell. I know that it grew over time, but maybe at this point it was like, this thing is going to be huge. It's popular. It's doing well. I'm gonna probably write a bunch of these books. I want to lay the groundwork for super rich lore, all this stuff about the Age of Legends and how we got from there to here, and how all this different stuff works. The Aiel, and introducing all kinds of different cultures now. We get the what is it, the Sea Folk, and the we got the Tinkers, and we've got all these different cultures being introduced. The Shanshan, obviously, and all these different cities have their own distinct cultures and stuff. And he's really starting to thread that and how it all works in the geopolitical sense, which some people find that stuff kind of dry, but I think to make this world feel lived in and real is essential. And so he's setting a lot of that up here, and it really feels like the scope of the story is just getting bigger and bigger in this book for me.
I think he's hit his stride here. There's something that feels the most engaging that it's felt so far with the characters. I think that he's found a nice pace with this book, where I did feel like the Dragon Reborn was a little bit rehashing what happened in The Great Hunt. And things happened so quickly, and because Rand was kind of off screen, just all kinds of wild stuff was happening. And something about the pacing here so far feels like I hope that this is kind of what it remains like for the rest of the series. It's really felt like he's stepped into like what is his own world, whereas I think the previous 3 books, for the most part, felt familiar to me. He's kind of evaluated like, what do I like about the series? What do I want to focus on? And like, where do I want to take it going?
And it's really
forward?
stepping into its own, because like, while I still think he wears a lot of his influences on his sleeve, like a lot of it is pretty obvious. And I think he kind of knows, like, if you're a big fan of Dune, if you're a big fan of Lord of the Rings, like you're going to kind of recognize a lot of what he's doing. So sometimes I think there's kind of a wink and nod at us, like readers in the know. But I still think he's doing a good enough job of differentiating, right? And like finding a fresh way to tackle a lot of these familiar tropes.
And I wanted to talk about that because I think a lot of what it has to do with is this device, the wheel that he set up. The idea of like recursion of these myths and the way that like things are coming back around. And I think
Which
that
he has
like,
said is based on like an Eastern philosophy concept and stuff.
Yeah. At the end of our last book, actually, we didn't even talk about it. There was like a speaking with the author section, and I liked hearing that in the audiobook. Yeah. And I liked listening to him talk about how like this is like determined future for these characters, but like how they can operate within that and like subvert expectations based on like what past lives did. And they're also kind of like remembering things from past lives. And then like it's all connected. So like what goes forward is going to affect what happened in the past in a sense too.
Yeah. And it's like it's that push and pull of being trapped in your fate, but then also like trying to find ways around things. And like, we see characters who try and avoid something that's fated only to wind up bringing it about. And it's kind of like dealing with time travel and stuff too, right? Like you can't avoid it. Like it's going to happen, but it gets into like free will and stuff, but all in like a fantasy setting where there's magic, and like the Taviran, like by definition, are sort of able to shape fate around them. So they seem to be kind of people who are able to break certain rules about prophecy, and yet they're also the ones who have the most prophecies about them. So he sets it up for where you're not really sure. You're like, he says that it's going to happen, and yet he's given us characters who like stated power is they're able to like shape reality around them and shape stuff. So it's like, are they able to escape some of this stuff? And I think that becomes like an interesting tension throughout the series.
And it feels like to an extent, yes, but then it was always fated that they would.
Right.
You know
it keeps
what I mean?
feeling like they're breaking it or they're trying to, and then it's like they end up fulfilling it still, but in like a different way or something. And it's like a way you didn't foresee, but it still does seem to fulfill the prophecy often.
Yeah. And then the stuff we talked about last week, like the dream world continues to be important.
Oh,
here.
yeah.
And then
we get even more rules and breakdowns of this. Like, I feel that even stated more plainly now, like how it works and you know.
That's Teleron Riyadh, which I want to try to memorize and really
Teleron
really embed
Riyadh,
that.
okay.
Teleron Riyadh. And then the other cool thing is that like these the Angreal are super important, and like I didn't realize, I thought it was going to be like kind of a minor thing in the series that there's like these things, but it's like no, there's Terra Angreal, Sa Angreal, they're all over the place.
They're magic items. Terra Angreal are like your classic magic items in my opinion. They like some of them don't even require you to be a channeler to use them. They're just magic things that like use the one power in some way. And then Angreal are like amplifiers, and they can make people who are already powerful crazy powerful, and then you put those in the hands of like the Dragon Reborn, for example, and the power gets like unbelievable. And then
same thing with Sa Angreal is just a level up.
And that's even more than that, right? Yeah, it's like when you're approaching God status when you have those in your hands, right?
Really, it's these Terra Angreal that keep surprising me in a lot of ways.
Because they have like special ways they work. No one really understands them. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's just so many of them. We keep hearing about like some that have been stolen, some that are like, you know, with other factions and stuff.
Yeah.
And
different cultures seem to have like caches of them.
And some people don't even realize that what they are, because like I think some of the time you need to be able to channel to
sometimes you do.
them.
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, those are cool, and like that like brings about this idea of prophecy, and everything that we're talking about here is like you're getting prophecy from dreams, you're getting like, you know, communication through dreams, and a lot of like kind of abstract things that you can try to draw on. And then the other element is like we're introduced to these other factions of like wolf or like fox people and snake people, and like all of that
snakes
stuff.
And foxes, the elfin and the elfin,
eelfin
and elfin, something like that. Yeah. We have a lot to talk about with them. So I'm going to just lay out how we're going to tackle this episode. So there's a lot that happens before the group all sort of goes their separate ways from the Stone of Tyr. So the first section we're going to talk about is everything that leads up to that. Then we're going to move into everything that's going on with Perrin in the Two Rivers so far. and then we'll move to the Aiel Waste and talk about Rand there and Mat, because the stuff that happens at Rhuidean is, I think, considered like a real turning point, or just like a really significant moment in the series. It's one where a lot of fans come back to time and again to try and like suss it out for meaning. There's a lot of layers to it. There's a lot that just goes on in that sequence. So we're going to talk about that. I've done some research. I've said what I've read so far, but I also went into the wikis and was doing some research into this stuff just to kind of wrap my head around it. But I'm going to try not to reveal everything that I know, because a lot of it is kind of spoilers for what's going on. But I have this in my mind so that if you have questions, I can try and like answer them and talk to you about it in certain ways. But just know I'm gonna try not to like give you all the answers, but maybe kind of guide the discussion a little bit as we get to that point.
Yeah, definitely. All that stuff is super interesting, and that gets back to what I was talking about, those snake and fox people, and like you're getting prophecy from those as well in crazy ways that I wouldn't have expected.
They're answering questions, and it's like...
Yeah, and setting up many more. Yeah.
Okay. If you're ready, man, I think let's jump into the first bit of plot here, because there's a lot to get through. Faced with the tension of sharing Rand with others, as well as coming to understand their similar stubbornness and devotion towards him, Egwene Alvir steps aside, formally inviting her close friend and daughter heir of Andor, Elaine Trakand, to take Rand as her own. Elaine, overjoyed by her friend's sacrifice, allows Egwene to declare the end of her assumed betrothal to Rand before admitting her love for him and starting a romantic relationship. Rand is surprised, however, when his previous traveling companion, Selene, reveals herself to be Lanfear, one of the Forsaken, and tells Rand to join her. She desperately pleads with him to join the forces of the Shadow, even stating her willingness to defy the Dark One, if only he would be with her. As Rand furiously rejects her, the Stone of Tyr is suddenly stormed by Trollocs and Myrddraal, which are presumably sent by other Forsaken. Finally, Rand uses Kalendor to send a lightning storm to kill all of the Trollocs and Fades, leaving some believing Rand has gone mad. Mat passes through the twisted redstone doorframe in the stone to get answers for his 3 questions. He learns that he has to go to Rhuidean to survive and meet his fate, which is to marry the daughter of the 9 moons, to die and live again, and to give up half the light of the world to save the world. After being thrown out, he learns that Rand and Moiraine also passed through the doorframe. However, they refuse to reveal their questions and answers. Rand declares his intention to follow the Aiel to their home in the Aiel Waste. Egwene and Moiraine resolve to accompany him. Mat Cauthon follows because of the prophecies. Perrin Aybara, after hearing rumors of trouble back home in Two Rivers, chooses to return to the Two Rivers. And Fail Bashir goes with him. Elaine, Nynaeve, and Julian Sandar and Tom Marilyn decide to go to Tenchico to hunt the Black Aja. Also, Min Farshaw arrives in Tarvalon to report to the Amarillan Suin Sanche. Okay, so that's just the last line of this section of plot summary. But what's funny is this actually occurs first. So this is a little out of order. They were kind of jumping around. But that does give a big overview of all the stuff that happens in the first chunk of this book, which is pretty significant.
Yeah.
But actually, let's start with Min, because Min is the very first thing we get. This is I wrote that this is of note because this is the only book that doesn't have a prologue. And instead, the chapter 1 basically just acts like a prologue. Because we do get lots of different characters' point of views, and it felt like the prologue. I didn't realize that it wasn't called that. But yeah, we get Min. One of the most significant chunks is her arriving at the tower, or returning to the tower, and everything that's going on there. So yeah, give me your thoughts on Min and what's being set up at the tower, because she's seeing some ominous signs.
Oh yeah. I think I know where this might be going just based on all of that, and I love that Swan's the Amarillan seat is just like, don't worry about that. There's no way that's gonna happen. I'm like, she's always right. Everything she says.
So what do you think is
right.
gonna happen?
So Min is coming into the tower and she's looking around and she's just seeing dead and defeated.
Yeah. Like everybody she's seeing is like, that person's gonna die. That Aes Sedai's gonna die. Her warder's gonna die. That warder's gonna be imprisoned. She sees an Aes Sedai with like a collar on her.
Collar, yeah. Which goes back to the Seanchan, and then the Amarillan is like, no, there's no way that's gonna happen. It's gonna be the Black Aja for sure. And I'm like, let's slow our roll a little bit. Let's listen to Min. She's seeing these things. Immediately I'm like, okay, so the Seanchan, they're far from the sea. That's a notable thing that Amarillan seat says. Far from the sea, so it'd be difficult for them to get there and to attack the tower. I'm like, tower's coming down. That's gonna be like that's what I think is gonna happen, because that's gonna be the most like dramatic thing narratively that can happen happen
You,
here.
you,
And
you
we're
think the Shan Chen are attacking the tower?
I think that would be where I'd go with it for
Okay.
sure, or some other faction. I think that seat of power that's been seen as like so powerful and untouchable comes down, crumbles, and then obviously Rand and the Dragon Reborn is like then he's like the only real light to turn to. I think that's where we might be going with that. But Min's stuff is really cool and I like the character too, because I like that I like her personality, and I like Robert Jordan's writing in general. I'll like commend him on this. Is like, I think it's gotten more interesting as it's gone, and I really love his imagination. Like like I said, a lot of the paths that he sets us down. I'm like, Matt and going along with Rand to the Aiel Waste, that's brilliant. I'm like, we need. I was like, because at first Matt was kind of dicking around town and gambling and doing his normal thing, and I'm like, it's starting to get a little stale. And then he immediately sends him off on this adventure to the Aiel Waste, and I'm like, that's so clever. And then every kind of POV that we're following right now, or every storyline that we're following, feels like it's like just as engaging as the last. So I'm really impressed by that.
I agree with that. Like all the plot lines are super engaging at this point in the
Yeah.
story. Yeah.
And Min's stuff right now is just like, I'm like,
Well, this big event is hanging over your head. Like, it's such an ominous way to start the book, right?
Yeah.
She's just walking around and like, that person's gonna die, that person's gonna die. Like, yeah.
Yeah. And I do like that level of, if everything's safe the whole way through and no one dies and like everything's hunky-dory and this Amerlin seed is always powerful and the White Tower is always there, then it just feels safe. Like, you always know that there's an army of Aes Sedai ready to go. But if they get brought down, like narratively, that's going to be like, oh shit, like the world is legitimately on the brink, and now we have to rely on Rand and Co to save them and see what we can do from here.
So I just want to say one thing while I'm thinking about it, because you just talked about Robert Jordan's writing style. I like his writing style. The sort of modus operandi of this series is to be immersive, and he's incredibly immersive. One of the things that I found fun and enticing about the series when I was a teenager reading this series was a lot of the ways he deals with men and women. He has this thing where, like, across all cultures, men will like agree with each other about women, and women will agree with each other about men, and they all sort of treat it the same way. There's like these like universal truths that they all agree on, and they're very like, it's kind of fun, and it gives you sort of a social framework, but it feels like it's hinting at like a truism to the world that despite all these different cultures, like, we can all agree that men behave this way and women behave this way, and like it's kind of fun, but like obviously, I feel like even if you can look at it two ways. One, you have the sort of the gender binary is obviously something that has been talked a lot about, has been, I think, provably shown to be a false binary. You have a whole spectrum of genders out there and people who identify different ways.
And to give us credit, I think, in my memory of this, is my reaction right away was that to make this binary, even in Eye of the World, I was pushing back a little bit on this. And I was like, I don't love that, like, we're engaging with this on like a total, like, there's no nuance to it. It's like there's men, there's women, that's where it is. And I felt like that was going to be an issue. And I also felt like the women were being set up to be like in service of the men in a sense, which you tend to see in fantasy stories, and then also like almost villains at times. And I'll give him credit on the fact that, like, I think he's produced some really interesting and engaging women characters,
and I think that's
across the board.
Definitely accurate. As much as he's really hammering this gender dynamic home, he does absolutely give a ton of thought and care to developing his women characters, to making them interesting, to making them dynamic and important to the story. I think he absolutely does that.
But getting back to what you're talking about, reading this in 2025, he was writing them in the 90s and early 2000s. Reading it in 2025, I can't help but feel like it's not as inclusive as it could be, and it feels like the framework on its own starts from a place that's like, I'm thinking about it often, and I think it's a little distracting for me that it is so binary,
well, and the other thing I was going to go for, because I wanted to say, like, there's that sort of analysis, which I think is one you'll see a lot there, a lot out there, and it's definitely something that's rattled around in my mind. But my other reaction to it is a more personal one, and it's that as I've grown into adulthood and dated women, but also like had many women who are friends and colleagues, and who I've been around quite a bit and consider some of my closest friends, I think the kind of insidious thing that it implies is this like sort of fundamental, like, we're almost two different species kind of attitude. And it always rubbed me the wrong way, because like the more I've hung out with women, the more I'm like, they're just people. Like, it's always like this like divide I always hate, because it's like you treat the other gender as if, or other genders as if they're like a completely other species than you. And it's like, no, we're all people. And like the more we can like recognize that, I think the healthier it would be. But so when I see like older, wiser characters reacting in certain ways that line up with our younger, like admittedly they're in their like early 20s, a lot of these characters, if not late teens, right? A lot of our main characters who have what I would consider a more juvenile sort of thoughts about dating and about women. I'm fine with that. It's when all these like older, wiser characters seem to just kind of back it up that where I start getting a little frustrated, because like I admit that there is certainly like a part of my life where I thought certain ways, and I can recognize why people feel that way. And I'm not trying to say that you wouldn't in this scenario, but I just wish that sometimes when they'd meet someone who's been married a long time, or when they, you know what I mean? Instead of meeting these characters and having that belief challenged in any way, it's always reinforced, right? It's like, well, here's how you get around it, you know? And like, it's always sort of reinforced. And that just, it bothers me a little bit reading it in 2025, like you said. I'll move on, because I don't think it's like this isn't a fatal flaw of the series. I'm still able to enjoy it. It's just something that I have noticed I'm reacting to as I read, because it comes up quite a bit in the series. Like, it's one of his favorite sort of things to harp on, and he's having fun with it. A lot of it's played for like laughs, kind of an elbow in the ribs kind of thing. But it just doesn't all land for me nowadays.
I agree. And it is of that time as well. Like where, like, I think I don't even know how to like really articulate what it is specifically, but there's a lot of like almost juvenile, like random nudity, the sexual nature of
he
some of the
loves to have
scenes,
women
like,
randomly naked.
And men and it's
like, and then just like the way people react to it.
And,
And admittedly, like if you're like 20 years old and you're seeing a woman naked, and especially in this world, you know, like you're probably going to be pretty shocked. So it's like, some of it's fair. It's just kind of like how often he hits it. And
I just think that there's like a almost like, and again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think there's like almost like a bit of like a pervy nature to it. And it's like,
people have noticed that every time he talks about a woman crossing her arms, he has to say underneath her breasts. Which is just a weird way to always talk about breasts every time you mention it, when it feels pretty unnecessary.
It's like, it seems like Robert Jordan was a fan of breasts, but yeah, but to talk about it every time, again, I think and I think often I laugh at it, right? Like there's like not necessarily that like underarm thing, but like if Matt is interacting with a woman and like is like kind of fumbling through it,
and like he's kind of a Lothario character, and so like I expect a certain amount from him, and it's like I don't want to like take all this away. I just wish there was a little more nuance for my taste to it, and some characters who challenge that sort of worldview that it seems like everybody seems to share instead. Especially
with older characters, like you said, and then getting into some of the Aiel looks at like multiple partners, and same thing with the Aes Sedai and their warders and some of that stuff.
Yeah, because we hear about these polyamorous relationships that go on in these different cultures and stuff. Yeah.
You would think that those people would be kind of entering those scenarios with a little bit more like, I don't know, couth or something, like they've been there before.
Yeah, but instead he kind of clings to the idea that there are just sort of like truisms that exist in the world. Anyway, let's move on from this. Some people are probably cheering us on, but other people are probably very annoyed with us. So let's move on. So another thing that gets brought up here that I think is important with these bubbles of evil, which and now that I know more about like sort of writing and storytelling, looking at each of these, I thought they were thematically interesting ways to challenge our protagonists. In ways that are applicable to their story arcs. So Matt gets confronted with playing cards who have come to life that he has to fight, right? Perrin gets attacked by his axe, the thing he is deliberately trying to like switch for the hammer, as we talked about in the last book. Like he wants to choose the hammer over the axe because the hammer can be both a building implement and a weapon, versus the axe, which is like only a weapon, as he says, which they also chop wood with an axe. I don't know.
I was going to say,
I get what he's getting
inherently
at,
it's supposed to cut.
It's specifically like a battle axe, which you wouldn't chop wood with, which I get.
Sure.
So he's having this challenge, and the axe is the thing that attacks him, right? And he like literally has like a thing where he stabs the axe against the wall and stuff. Like it's funny. And then Rand has like this whole Army of Darkness fight.
Yep.
With
himself.
His reflection in the mirror that comes out, and then he like breaks it, and it shatters into a bunch of tiny little Rands who are running around, and he's fighting them all, and he's getting cut up. And it's like he's fighting with a fractured version of himself, right? Like this is pretty sort of thematically in line with what's going on with him and his fractured psyche. So I appreciated that they were sort of so sort of enmeshed in the stories that are being told. But even within the world of the book itself, these bubbles of evil that are supposedly coming up from the Dark One's prison and sort of affecting the world in these sort of surreal ways. Like, what are your thoughts on this going on now?
Yeah, I think that every book he keeps adding in an additional thing that the Dark One can affect the world
Yeah.
with, and keeping it fresh and new. I think that that's smart.
And he justifies it by saying that like his power is growing in the world, right? Like over time,
Seals
the
are
seals
getting
are
weaker.
weakening. He's getting more influence. Yeah.
And I do like the way that it's kind of articulated by Moraine about like how it's like a bubble that's coming up through the weave, like through the
Yeah.
pattern almost, and like catching on to the fact that they're Taviran. So it's like almost attracted to the
Yeah.
Taviran.
So it can
and,
happen
like,
to anybody, it sounds like, but it's
Yeah.
particularly around the Taviran. It seems to happen more frequently.
I think it's a cool idea. Again, I think that that's pretty imaginative.
I like
but
that he can kind of do whatever he wants with it. Like clearly, just about anything can happen if you want it to.
Yeah, it's a bit monster of the week though, where it's like he can just at any time pop it up.
Yeah.
And create an interesting scene. I think that it's motivated, but I do think it's like convenient storytelling device for him for sure. And I think that like as he goes, he's realizing more and more of that. Like he's not going to just rely on like Murdral and Trollocs and things like that. Like he's going to keep finding ways to stir the pot.
Yeah. And I think within the world of the story, you can also see that in Tyr right now, in the Stone of Tyr, all three of our Taviran are near each other. And it's kind of said that when that happens, their Taviran power like amplifies each other's Taviran power to where it's like this massive conglomeration of this like reality bending people. So it makes sense that like the bubbles of evil would like first start happening here. And so that I think that is kind of an in-universe explanation, right? Like when you get these three together, that's kind of the inverse side of the Taviran. Like a Taviran, you're very powerful in certain ways, but also you're drawing things like this to you.
For sure. I think speaking of Taviran stuff and everything that goes on here, you can see the influence of Rand being even more intense than Matt or Perrin, because like Matt is like,
yeah, I want to know how you're feeling about Rand now, because I think Rand is taking a bit of a shift since we've last like had his significant portions of his POV in like book 2.
He's, I mean, just stepping into a way more capable scenario, it seems like. And I do like that he started to position. I think Rand grew quickly off page. That's what I'll say.
Yeah.
And then I like that it's challenging other characters. Like Moraine is often surprised or challenged by what Rand is doing now in ways that we never would have seen before. Moraine always knew what was going on and was challenging the other character, like our Taviran, quite a lot.
He's starting to sort of embrace his role more and use his power and use his influence to like serve his own ends essentially and what he thinks is right. And because of that, he's becoming like more of a genuine leader, I think you could argue.
He wants to be like kind of a benevolent leader too. Like you can tell from like the taxation and some of that stuff that's going on with
right,
like
like support
the greedy
peasants
lords. Yeah. Like that's like he would like to be that. I don't know what that, I think often in storytelling we can see that the best intentions are all well and good, but then it might not end up being the best in the long run. So we'll see kind of what his good nature leads to for the world. But
certainly the case if you're reading George R.R. Martin.
For sure. Yeah,
it is interesting trying to figure out like what kind of storyteller Robert Jordan is. I think you still kind of don't know.
Well, I think he's developing it, right? Like I think he's like kind of evolving it, which I like. Like it started out very Tolkien, like we've talked about with Eye of the World, and now we've entered into like something that's more mature. He's finding ways to make Rand more interesting too, because he's like, well, he's got this sangreal that's absolutely ridiculously powerful. Let's have him stab it in the stone as like a message to everyone around and say like, I own this land, go ahead and try to take it from me, and I'm gonna go off on an adventure.
Traps it or something somehow, right?
Yeah, he sets a bunch of weaves, I think, around it that only he can pick up. But I think he's weakening the character in order to do that, right? Like he no longer has that sangreal when he goes off to this next adventure, and I think that's a smart way of doing things. I also can see it as a storyteller, like, oh, okay, he's gonna debuff his main like super powerful character here, which I appreciate.
Well, since we're on the topic of Rand, what do you think about this the Egwene scenario that's played out with Elaine? Because we had just talked in the last book about how you were still thinking Egwene is woman number 3 in Min's foreseeing. Do you still think that is true, or have you moved on that thought at all?
Some part of me still thinks that they could end up together, just knowing how fantasy stories go. But it's a subversion, and I like subversion in my storytelling. I think it's cool to think of an idea where, you know what, it's nice that they have that bond, but they have this conversation where they think of each other as brother and sister.
Yeah, they talk about how like I still love you, but it's more as like a sister or a brother now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a cool dynamic that we don't often see from men and women in stories, that where like it goes from romantic to more platonic, and but still like there's a shared experience and love there. And like where that can go going forward is like if we think of Egwene as Rand's, you know, sister, I think that's still just as engaging if they don't end up romantically together. And I'm not the person who maybe some people will be upset by that, you know, some people may say that, oh no, they should be fated and end up together, but I like that feels kind of fresh to me, in a way that the person that he was supposed to end up with, that, you know, the you know, original girl may not end up being, you know, his wife or whatever. And in a sense, I think that gives Egwene a lot more agency in the story too, if they don't end up together.
So, if Egwene is not it and Elaine is it, and we know Min is,
yeah.
Number 3. Any new theories?
I don't know right now. You know, Lanfear is making that would be an interesting one, because I know we've talked about a lot about how like she
certainly seems to want to be one of them, right?
She wants to be, yeah. But she's forsaken, but she also has her own goals in the story.
But she's clearly like pining for him, right? Like, but for like Lews Therin, that she sees him as the same as.
And how like you can see a part of that, like through their interaction, like maybe she will come to love Rand as well in a way, and like maybe he can pull her away from Balsamon in some way, and that would be a blow to him. And I don't know, that could be interesting, I guess. But right now it's like Min for sure, and Elaine at this point. And I think it's interesting to look at him grappling with. He feels this love building for Elaine. But he's like, it feels similar to how I feel about Min, and I'm like, it's gonna be interesting to see how he navigates that whole scenario. And look, that's the thing, that obviously there's polyamorous relationships for sure, but to me with Jordan, it like in a like a kind of chosen one story, it just feels like it's going to be a difficult tightrope to walk to make it not feel like, oh, this is the ultimate wish fulfillment like character. Don't you want like 3 women and all the powers in the world and all, you know what I mean? Like,
I think you're right, because like I think that was always something that I wondered early on when I read that. I was like, that can't be how this is going to go, right? Like, and I think a lot of people had that feeling of like, there's no way he's going to do this, right? And like, how is this actually going to play out and not feel gross in some way, or feel, you know, and yeah, I think that's a fair thing to continue to track as we go forward, because he, you know, seems to be leaning into it. The attack from the Trollocs and the Myrddraal happens, right?
Yeah.
We see some badassery out of all of our characters, fighting ably.
Speaking of like just kind of wild sexually charged scenes, there's this other I forget what kind of, like, she's a
yes.
Barrelane, yeah.
Thank you for bringing her up. I meant to bring her up and I was going to forget. We get the introduction of Barrelane, who is like, she is seductress. She's like written as this seductress who is like really dangerous in the sense that she like knows what she's doing and she's being manipulative, but she goes after Rand, and then also makes a pass at like Perrin too. And then has a really funny moment where she sees Matt in the hallway and she goes, "Too much like me." She just walks away.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, players. And maybe she'll be important going forward. I just thought it was important to note that like she's coming in like scantily clad and trying to like seduce him and everything like that, and he turns her away. And then he fights the shards of himself from the mirrors and stuff like that, and she's like, fuck that guy's crazy, I don't want any part of that. And then the battle breaks out like very soon after that, I believe.
Yeah, it's like right after that, basically. Yeah,
I did not expect, because they talked often in the last book, I was like, oh, this is going to be a stronghold for sure. Maybe it still will be the stone. But they talked about how it was so impenetrable and everything like that. And then guess what? It gets penetrated by the Dark Ones. And,
yeah, they seem to kind of like appear out of nowhere, right? And like, I think it becomes an open question of like, how are these armies moving around? We know about the ways, but it's also like haunted by, was it Masha and Jin is in there eating, and then we know that it'll eat Trollocs. So we're like, how are they getting around? I
think Lanfear does come to visit him. I think it's during the Lanfear interaction.
Yeah, she's there, but she doesn't seem to know or approve of what's going on with all these shadow spawn. And in fact, we do see one interesting moment where a Myrddraal gets attacked by a group of Trollocs and killed.
Yeah, well, Trollocs are fighting Trollocs, I think, and like they're all fighting each other.
It's almost like there's like two different groups that got.
I was kind of interpreting that as like Lanfear sending forces to fight against somebody else's forces, but then I think she explicitly says like, it's not me, like I'm not doing this or something.
Yeah.
So I don't know kind of what that ended up being. I mean, there was a couple of tense moments where it was like Rand was legit gonna get killed or something like that, and then like Trollocs saved the day.
Yeah.
And
It was funny though, because she called someone. He's like fighting on it, and she's like, "It's so funny. You're out here just like fighting with your sword, and it's like you have Kalendor in your room, and you haven't done anything with it. It's just sitting in there."
And it said that Kalendor can be claimed at this point by anyone.
Yeah,
so
she's like,
somebody
now
could
that
just
you've claimed
grab
it, like one of the Forsaken can come and grab it. And he's like, oh shit.
which would be a bad thing. So he runs back and grabs it, and then he lets a bunch of people die too, which I think he feels guilty about throughout this battle.
Yeah, he starts to have a bit of that Superman sort of thing, right? Where he's like, oh, I can't say. Like he's starting to already feel the weight of everybody he doesn't save.
And so he uses crazy blast, and I'm just like constantly thinking about, all right, Saidin has been tainted. He's tapping into it, and every time he taps into it on such a crazy amount, like he's putting himself further and further closer to the brink of going mad.
He's bringing that taint into him, and it's affecting him, and maybe making him more mad. Yeah, that is that. Every time he talks about it, it's written. But that reminds me of a scene which I particularly loved. It's where Elaine and Egwene come in to try and see if they can like teach him anything about the power, right? Because they're like, maybe we can talk to you about the power and like teach you some stuff. And they kind of learned that they can't for whatever reason, because they're fundamentally different powers. But through the course of that scene, Robert Jordan does a really good job of like demonstrating the differences, one, like how they're approached differently, and then also like showing us power levels. And I love the thing where like it's kind of juvenile how it all plays out, but that's okay. They're all young characters, so I kind of get it. But like Rand in sort of fit a peak is like, oh, I'll show you, and he like starts having like a bunch of crazy shit happen at the same time. He has like a table like starts dancing around the room, like some stuff starts melting on the walls. The fire flames up on either side, and then like feathers all burst out of the like mattress, and then everything starts catching on fire, and it seems like it kind of gets out of control a little bit that he can't do. But what's really cool is this whole scene is sort of from the point of view of I think it's Egwene, and she's like, I don't know how he was able to do that. Like he was able to have all these independent weaves going at the same time. She's like, it's exponentially more difficult with every additional weave you do. So it's like 2 is not just twice as hard as 1. It's more than that, right? And so he had like a dozen going at the same time, and she's like, holy shit, like I couldn't do that. So that's her realizing that like his power is probably at a different scale, but also maybe something different about Saidin versus Saidar.
Oh yeah, interesting. Yeah. That could be. I think she's just looking at his raw power basically, and she's already said to be one of the most powerful Aes Sedai in generations or whatever, or in hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to note that they feel that way. And yeah, I actually like that scene a lot because they show more of, while wielding these powers are slightly different, he can still see what they're doing and replicate it.
He has like
sense.
Goosebumps on his flesh, and they realize that that's him reacting to them or embracing the source.
So there's ways to kind of like learn your way into like sensing that they're using it, because they can't sense him using it all either, like they normally can for women.
Yeah, it's something to definitely consider. Something we'll continue to talk about, the differences in the magic here. But all right, so the next thing to talk about after this big fight is Mat going through the doorframe, and so does Rand and Moiraine, although we don't really know what goes on with them. We haven't heard much about it.
Well, this is also a case in point of you were talking about like the change in Rand, him going through the doorway. We'll talk about Mat for sure, but him going through the doorway, we don't necessarily know what he asked or anything like that, but I think because Mat's is played for laughs, we can assume that Moiraine and Rand were more capable with their questions, because I think it like seals you. You can ask 3 questions or so, and then it seals you off. And Mat sneaks in a 4th, which I noted. I was like, oh, he asked 4 there. Is he going to be like cursed because of this or something? And
he immediately is breaking the rules for sure.
Yeah, and then Rand comes out, and it seems like he's like developing a plan. Moiraine, same thing. So it'll be cool to note, like, especially knowing what we saw when Rand goes through the other doorway later on, like how much information we just got off screen for Rand versus like what we get with Mat. And Mat gets in there, and he's so distracted by these creatures, like
these like tall snake creatures. I think it's the Aelfin, right?
Aelfin.
Or Aelfin with the A. I think is this one.
Yeah.
The Aelfin are the ones that come later.
They go in, and I think he asks a question, and the way they answer it throws him off or something. He's like, what should I do? And they're like, you got to go do this thing or you're going to die. And then he's like, what? I'm going to die? And then he had these other things planned that he was going to ask. like he wanted to recover his memories. He wanted to escape the Aes Sedai, and he wanted to. I can't remember the third right now, but anyway, he had the plan going in, and then he gets punched in the mouth by how weird this is, and then he totally forgets it and asks a bunch of random stuff, and then he asks a fourth question. I really did think like, oh man, maybe they're gonna fuck him over now or keep him here or torture him or something. That whole world is crazy. I don't know what to make of that.
You know what this was reminding me of, this part here, and then also a lot of the stuff that happens later in Rhuidean. It was making me think of Miguel Enda and the Neverending Story. And you remember how like his father was like the surrealist painter and all this stuff. And he had this like he grew up around surrealism as an art form. And his fantasy in that book, it felt very surreal and strange, right? And I feel like these scenes remind me of that kind of fantasy where we've got the very Tolkien-esque fantasy. We got kind of sort of a more grounded fantasy. And then there's these moments where we get into these weird realms with these strange creatures and the rules are unclear and it's mythology. It's like multi-dimensional stuff going on. I really dig these parts, and I think there's some of the parts that people really find incredibly interesting to go back to and try and like figure out what's actually going on.
I thought it was fascinating, and I was like, oh man, is this a device that they can return to? And of course, like it seals them out after they've asked a certain number, and like they can't ever return, it seems. I don't even know, like I said, I don't know what to make of it. I expected this to be like attached to the dream world in a sense, and I don't think it is, like based on what we get later as well. And the dream world is the same kind of thing where it's like surrealist, where like they can take
dream
a
world
step
for sure. Yeah,
you can take a step and then you're on top of it. Like I think at one point Perrin is like kind of jogging along the tips of mountains and stuff. Like these characters though too, like they seem like they have a role, like they have a job to do. And are they characters? Or are they just like constructs of like some sort of like weird fantasy dimension or something? Like I don't know.
We'll return to talking about them, I think, at the end here. And then one last thing I'll say about them, and then we're going to leave these characters behind. The characters all start going their separate ways. We get some goodbyes, and it's kind of notable because for a while, a lot of these characters have been apart, and this is like them back together. And now they're all leaving again, and I think it's an open question of like when they'll be together again, right?
This is another like fantasy thing, right? Like this happens with the Starks in Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire. It happens with like a lot of fantasy stories where like you love this core group of characters and you kind of take for granted them being together for a period of time, and then they blast apart, and you're like, when are they going to get back together? Will they ever be back together?
Yeah.
And I like them being back together. I thought for a minute we were going to kind of live in this world, and then no, they're shooting different ways. I think notably too, something we haven't talked about is the Aes Sedai trio. I thought that they were going to continue to be getting together, and their like storyline of chasing the Black Aja continues here. I thought like maybe it would find some conclusion in the last one. No, it's continuing, but they're splitting off, and Egwene is going to the Wastes to like learn how to become a better dreamer.
Egwene and Avienda are going with Rand to the Wastes, and it's about learning how to become a better dream walker, because she meets one of these wise women, Aiel wise women, in one of her dreams. And basically then like a letter arrives like summoning her to come to them. And she finds out that like the White Tower hasn't had a dream walker in like 500 years. She's the first one. We don't know what that means exactly. She's still learning about it, and through her, we're going to learn about it. And then, like you said, the other ones, they head off. They end up meeting up with Tom Marilyn and Julian Sandar, which is cool because he's like that thief catcher from the last book that we liked a lot, who has had an interesting journey, but like he is now with them, and they're on their way to this place, Tenchiko.
He was another one. Like last week I talked about how some of these characters, like we have inns and ships and captains, innkeepers, like all these characters, they're named, they come in, they talk to the characters, they seem important, and then they're gone. We don't see them again, at least as far as I've seen. And like I thought this was another character, this thief catcher. I was like, he's just gonna be somebody who shows up and is gone. No, he's coming along for this journey, and I think it was cool to see how like Moraine manipulated Tom, and seemingly some of his, because we had heard that he was kind of he was connected to Morghese.
Yes.
I knew that. Like we knew that he was connected to Morghese, and I just didn't understand how or why. And I think through this book so far, we've started to see he has a lot of like political intrigue to him. He's like a Littlefinger-esque character.
Yeah, well, and it seems like he had some sort of relationship with her after her, I think, former husband died. Is the implication, and then like it seems like Elaine knows him from childhood, but she doesn't realize that.
Right. She doesn't understand yet. And so that's leverage for him to go with
And like
Elaine.
something happened, we don't know what.
Take care of her.
But he is
for sure.
very experienced in like dealing this like Game of Houses thing they talk about or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, very similar to Game of Thrones.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned Littlefinger.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know that he's going to be. I think he's a good guy.
He's got some political savvy to him.
I think he's got like the right morals to him. I think he's going to end up being a good guy. But I think it's cool to see him like dragged along for this because he's definitely like very like Matt Cawthon character where he wants to kind of just go with the wind and go be a gleeman and everything like that. And then he's forced into this scenario here. And but I think that'll be really intriguing because we haven't got a ton of that as they get out there so far.
So yeah, they're on their way there, and then I think that's the last we've dealt with them for the part of the book we've read so far. Min has been starting to pretend like she's like a different person. She's like going by her full name, and she's acting quite differently than she normally does. Try and like sort of suss out what's going on here and be sort of Suin's like spy.
Yeah, I mean Min here continues to be a super interesting character. I think that like her power, they've said multiple times, is not connected to the one power. And that is interesting to me. And I'm trying to figure that out. I'm like, what does that even mean?
Well, supposedly, so that same thing with like Perrin and his wolf abilities that's not related to the one power. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. And I remember noting too with Eye of the World when Matt got the dagger that Morgoth, that character, like that's in that haunted, what was that, like the city
or something?
Yeah. I remember noting like that seems like an entity outside of the dark one, the evil one, Balsamon. Yeah. Like that's, you know what I mean? So I think
it's kind of described like there's different kinds of evil out there and they don't always cooperate with each other.
Yeah. And there's other like forces at work. So it's cool. Like I'm just curious to see like if the one power is one thing in this world, what's kind of pushing along all these other powers and things that like, you know, change the world in some ways. But Min's is like super interesting because she has really important prophecies that always come true when she's sure of them. And we're seeing a lot of like, there's a cloud hanging over a lot of what Min is seeing right now. And I also, like I said before, I like that character a lot. I hope she becomes really, really important. And I know she probably will be because of her connection to Rand, but I like the way she talks to people. I like the way that she, like her motivations and things like that. I'm a fan so far.
Yeah. She's a little gender nonconforming, you could say.
Yeah,
with her short hair and like how she likes to wear pants and not, skirts and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on the Sea Folk? It's a new faction introduced. They're all sort of, they dressed in like bright colors. There's this whole thing where once they get away from shore, they all like strip to the waist, even the women, and so sort of another moment of Arbor Jordan having a little fun with that.
But I also do like a lot of women in my life have always said like it's not fair that guys can just pop their shirts off and stuff too. Like that is, it's like what is that social norm that's built in there?
Yeah.
And,
and he's pointing out that there are just like social mores that around. It's like what different societies consider like a taboo or not taboo. Like what kind of nipples can be shown, right? Sure. What settings and what's taboo and what's not taboo. It's very tied up in our cultural mores. And I think he's sort of putting that on display here. But one of the things we also learn about is they have a series of prophecies about the Dragon Reborn. They call him the Coromir. And there's this whole prophecy about him and their culture as well. Yeah,
I thought it's cool that he keeps introducing. It seems like with each book, there's like a new culture out there. I like that there's like a seafaring culture. I think that I like seeing that in fantasy stories. I think they tend to have like a certain like toughness to them. And like I'm curious to see like how they slot in to everything else that's already been introduced. I'm sure they could be important in a sense, and like they, having their own prophecies, like the Aiel have theirs, the Seanchan have theirs, I'm sure, which I don't know that we know a ton about, but now meeting these like the seafaring sea folk, I'm curious to see. One of the cool things that we see is that they channel, like they're hiding a bunch of channelers. Yeah. Which so if you can assume that there's a lot of channelers out there that have not been revealed and aren't necessarily at the White Tower, and I kind of like that.
Yeah, that's the implication, right? And they do have a run-in with the Seanchan, who we see have like the Damane, like they're captured channelers out there and stuff. So we know that they're still lurking out there. And we even get some POV chapters, I think, from this new lady who's sort of been in charge of the forces of the Seanchan. But it's not a lot, so we can kind of leave that aside for now. All right, that's a lot with the early part of this book. Let's move into the next middle section here, where we're going to talk about the Two Rivers. In the Two Rivers, Perrin discovers that the people there are caught between the Trollocs and the Children of the Light, with whom Padden Fane is working, and who believe Perrin is a dark friend. He also finds Varen Mathwin and Alana Mosvani, both Aes Sedai in the Two Rivers. They are searching for girls to bring to the White Tower to become Aes Sedai, since both Egwene and Nynaeve came from the Two Rivers and are strong in the power. And I'm going to stop there because everything else in the summary we haven't got to yet. But and there's some spoilers about like some of the true nature of what's going on there. But that's what we can safely talk about. He also meets someone that he calls Slayer in the Wolf Dream. They've gone through the ways together. He's continuing to his relationship with Fael is continuing to develop. He also meets this guy Lord Luke, who's like kind of a pretentious hunter of the horn who people are considering like a noble, basically, in Two Rivers. Perrin doesn't like him at all. And thoughts on this part of the book?
I'll just again give Jordan credit. Perrin going home. First of all, Two Rivers being under siege, possibly, and like knowing that there's farmers there, they don't have the forces to defend themselves, and knowing that like it's because of the Taviran, our favorite characters here, like all of our favorite characters, Egwene, Nynaeve, like all these characters are to blame because of the stirring up of this, but specifically Perrin. And then I think Padan Fain had said is like trying to lure Rand, but then he lures Perrin. And like a lot of the stuff that's set up here is really cool. I think like going through the ways again is awesome.
Does this remind you of anything from like another series?
Man, specifically?
Yeah.
I mean, is it Jon Snow going back to Winterfell? Like, what are we talking about?
Yeah, it could be. No, I was specifically thinking of the Scouring of the Shire from the Lord of the Rings books, which doesn't occur in the movies, but it's at the end, so it's positioned at a very different spot, right? But we've gone through 3 books here. So it feels kind of like Scouring the Shire, because I've always felt like Two Rivers is kind of like Hobbiton. It's this idyllic rural area, right? With so cut off from the rest of the world. Now the world has invaded, right? People are being threatened. And I think it's really interesting that we're seeing Perrin coming back from his hero's journey he's been going on, right? Like he's returning home changed now, and he's able to sort of take on a leadership role, much like what we see with some of the hobbits in Lord of the Rings, right? Who are able to sort of lead the forces of the hobbits against the orcs who invaded.
I think, I mean, just him going back, I think that's great storytelling. I think that there's a lot of important people that are back there. Like most of the time when the hero takes off, their whole family's dead, right? And they're like, oh, no reason to go back there, but everyone's still there. Like everyone's very vulnerable
for Perrin's
there.
family, we find out.
Yeah, and then that's crazy, right? Like then they kill it. And I'm like, this is an unstable dude who's like he's kind of grappling with a lot of different things here. I know that Perrin's gonna fuck some people up. You know what I mean? Like,
he came back and he was like, I'm gonna turn myself in so that the Children of the Light won't threaten the people here. And then he finds out that his entire family's dead. And he's just like, all right.
I like, he's trying not to be the wolf. He's trying not to be the wolf. He's trying to, not use the axe. He's trying to be the builder, the blacksmith, everything. Yeah. And he's going back with Fael, which is interesting, a dynamic.
He keeps trying to. He was like trying to drive her away, but finally kind of gives up on that.
Wants to keep her safe.
Also, Gaul, this Aiel, has come along with him, which is really cool. They have like this big friendship forming.
Yeah, it's the one that he saved, and so he has this like water debt, I think it's called, something like that.
Yeah.
And so
life debt,
I think, I love that's going on as well. A lot of the Aiel stuff, I'm trying to wait till we get there, but the Aiel
part of it is going on here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're very cool characters. I love their like code of honor. I like their kind of combat tactics. I like the spear. I like characters with spears. I think I've realized.
Sure. He's got a couple of spear women with him too. Some of the
maidens
of the spear are with him too, and they all have this really fun interaction with the innkeeper, which I really liked. When they first meet her, they call her Roof Mistress. And they're like, let me protect your roof mistress.
It's Egwene's mother. I think it's Egwene's family owns this inn or whatever. Yeah. And then they call her roof mistress and they're saying like, thank you for taking us in and everything like that. We will defend this house, basically. Like no matter what happens, we will. And they're like, no, you don't need to do that. And they're like, no, we will defend this house. So I like that. I think it's
really
cool.
fun. He has a lot of fun with that, like you know, they meet Loyal for the first time, who's no gear, and like the way they react to that. Like he's a lot of fun with these characters, you know.
He likes to bounce the cultures off of each other though, right? Like their kind of lack of knowledge about certain aspects like clashes and then ends up in funny scenarios or cool scenarios, things like that. But yeah, Perrin coming back in and learning that, and like I'm like, oh man, this is that trauma that Perrin kind of gets early in the show.
Did you catch? So there was kind of a short moment with Ordeith we get later, who is Padan Fain, and we basically get it revealed that although Perrin is told that Trollocs killed his family,
Yeah.
we get it revealed that it was actually Padan Fain, and they covered it up to make it seem like Trollocs did it, just so that like the rest of the White Cloaks wouldn't know.
Padan Fain's got it coming for sure. Like he's everywhere. He was in all three. I think he was in Dragon Reborn at some point, right? Like and he was definitely in Eye of the World and the Great Hunt,
Yeah.
and he was like a factor in causing strife for our characters. And here he's clearly done it again. And he's been, I mean, like attacking defenseless people and calling these hordes of Trollocs and the White Cloaks all on the front doorstep of Two Rivers.
Maybe he's calling them. We don't know actually why those are there, because he actually has a Myrddraal as his prisoner in his tent when he goes back, and he's been torturing it.
Yeah. So he is kind of like, he's definitely
he's like a wild card.
He's definitely a wild card.
He's in it for himself, right? And we hear that he's also like, I've been around since the breaking or something. Like he's talking like in this weird way, like he's some ancient being.
He's definitely got like that same kind of thing that I was talking about, where like he seemed like he was going to be like a servant of the Forsaken or a servant of Balsamon, and now it seems like he's doing his own thing. And I don't know why necessarily, but to me it's like he's torturing like the ring wraiths or like Dementors or like something like that, something that you didn't think that he could torture, and then bending it to his will is like pretty intense. And he doesn't seem like an imposing figure, but he seems like he's got some crazy powers around him or something like that.
Yeah, he must be, right? To have a freaking, Fade as a prisoner, he has to be, right? So he is aligned with the White Cloaks, which I continue to think the White Cloaks are kind of a brilliant creation by Robert Jordan. To me, they are this world's alt-right. They're the religious right. They wrap themselves in these white cloaks of purity, and they go about chasing shadow friends, and they have no nuance, and they condemn everybody. You're basically guilty until you can prove yourself innocent. And they're just, I don't know, like they're so self-righteous and frustrating.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I do think that there is room for, in the future, someone who is righteous and thinks like and is trying to do all of the right things, because we've seen a lot of corruption, I think, in the White Cloak so far. But I think there'll be room for someone to come in and be like, no, like I am righteous, I'm doing all these things on the code, like as a paladin kind of thing, where it's like I'm doing it all by the book.
Well, and they're all like, and they have all their rules, and they act like they're so self-righteous and that they know the right way, but then they have the questioners who are like clearly torturing people and getting false confessions out of them, and like they seem okay with that. And like you're right though, because he does continue to emphasize that like these are people. So, like, I think any group of people in the Wheel of Time series are not irredeemable. Like, it seems like, maybe Dark Friends, you could argue, once they've, like, fully sold their soul. But, like, he basically says that, like, Trollocs are basically irredeemable. And, like, Fades, Myrddraal. But, like, beyond that, like, if you're not actual Shadow Spawn, if you're a human, like, especially as a group, there are going to be some people in there that are actually decent. And he doesn't try and kind of just say like they're all terrible. But he's done a pretty good job of making us hate the White Cloaks so far, I think.
For sure. I mean, and they're like gunning for Perrin at this point. We've had some really high up.
He's been labeled a Dark Friend just because of his eyes, basically.
Yeah. Well, because he killed a couple of White Cloaks.
Yeah.
But the POV from the high up White Cloaks are interesting, because it's like, I think one of the guys, I think it was last book, that we were saying like he was being manipulated by a Forsaken or the Dark Friends in some way.
Yeah, it seems like maybe a Forsaken has like infiltrated the White Cloaks, or at least a Dark Friend of some kind. It's a lot of unclear identities going on.
And he sent this like what's his name, Bornhold?
Yeah,
I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and he seems like a decent guy who's just like he's fully wrapped up in this, right? Like maybe decent, I don't know, maybe not, but he's definitely not. He's not intending to be evil, even though he is now like aligned with the evil side, kind of against his knowledge.
He's a case in point of a character who, like, I think his dad was killed, and supposedly somebody said by Perrin, so now he's gunning for Perrin, and that's all he really cares about. So seeing all of that happening, and then Perrin walking into that hornet's nest is really cool. And then Perrin comes in, and I like the way that he's like telling all the farmers to like go, cluster together and kind of band together in that way.
Yeah, he starts kind of taking command, right? We see Tam is back. Tam
Oh
Altor
yeah, that was awesome.
return. And Matt Cawthon's dad, what's his name? Abel or something?
Both of them show up, and I think Tam is cool because we know from some of the babbling that he was doing when that initial attack happened. Like there's something else going on with Tam, and we know that
Like he might be a sword master or something. Like
that for sure. Yeah. He gave the hair and marked blade to Rand,
and they're both like incredibly good with the bow. We keep hearing just how amazing they are with their bows. Which, by the way, ravens continue to get a bad rap in this series. They just fucking kill any raven they ever see, and they're said that it's like they're the eyes of the Dark One, which is a very Lord of the Rings thing once again. But I just think about how ravens are fucking cool. They're like really cool birds, incredibly intelligent. Like they make friends with humans. Like they are really interesting. Crows too, crows and ravens, and a lot of those kinds of corvids. And it's just, I don't know, I think it's always kind of a shame when like an animal just gets labeled as like, oh, basically as bad as shadow spawn, kill them on sight.
Well, versus like all the birds of prey, like all like there's like owls and falcons and hawks, and they're all good.
They're all good.
Like they're always good. It seems, although they do, I think at one point a hawk does get killed.
Yeah, but I think it's not the good people aren't the ones bringing down the hawk. Somebody else does.
Okay,
I think.
Yeah, so Perrin, like he meets up with like there's Aes Sedai here as well.
Yes,
Varen,
who we haven't seen in a little while, of the Brown, and Alana, who have their warders with them. Yeah, I'm really curious to see what they do in the show with this, because a lot of these characters have been introduced, and like how many of them are gonna be here? Are we gonna get this plot line? Who's gonna be? Because Gaul was replaced with Avienda in the show. Just to touch on show stuff a little bit, with like Perrin saving Avienda instead of Gaul. And so I'm like wondering if Avienda is going to like kind of serve two roles here. Is she going to be her own, Avienda plotline and also somehow Gaul? Because that would be very different, because it's like two different groups, and like how is that going to work? I think it's
definitely important for her to be in the Waste too, because like we get the whole transfer from her being like a maiden to now she's training to be a wise one, which I think is going to be huge for her character. And like I don't know what necessarily that is going to entail. But she seems like she's getting more and more.
We're just starting to learn a little bit about her, right? Like we haven't got a lot from her. I don't even know if we've gotten any of her POV chapters. I don't think so.
But the stuff with Perrin and Varen, I think it's interesting because Varen keeps being like, "Be careful of this one over here." She's talking about the other Aes Sedai, and I'm like, I trust Varen. I think Varen's on the up and up for sure. Mm-hmm. But these other, what is it?
Alana or something like
Alana.
that. Alana.
I think like we should be suspicious of her, just based on like what Varen is saying.
Perrin is definitely suspicious of both of them.
He definitely is, yeah. But we've seen enough of Varen to where I feel comfortable thinking that she's on the good side. And she's like got information from the Amerlin seat in Moraine that a lot of other people don't have and stuff.
She's really taking note of a lot of what's going on with Perrin and like writing it in a book. She's like, oh, note your Taviran powers.
Well, she's of the Brown, right? Like she's all about the research and the background about all. Yeah. And then they end up saving like a lot of like the blacksmith and his family, and I think some of Coffin's. Yeah.
They save them from the camp, and they ride out, and then they're gonna go hunting some Trollocs. And that's kind of where we leave them. But yeah, so we can move on from the Two Rivers stuff. But any last notes you want to touch on here before we move into the Waste?
Touching on like Perrin with his wolf abilities and things like that, I think is cool too. Like the way he'll go into it when he needs to.
And what another trauma he has experienced! Holy shit! It's his entire family, all of his siblings, and both of his parents.
Yeah, it's fucked up. So he, like I said, I think he's gonna see red, even though his eyes are yellow. And he's gonna like just absolutely tear some white cloaks and dark friends or
yeah, because right now he thinks it's the shadow spawn, but we know that it was actually Ordeith, aka Padden Fane, who's working with the white cloaks.
Everybody around him is starting to see him. They're like, "Are you what's her name?" Fail says like, "Are you a soldier, or have you trained with soldiers and things like that?" Like I could see him becoming like building up forces and stuff, people coming along with him, and like I can see him like I'm curious to see like if he takes out all these antagonists in this area, if he takes out all the Trollocs and Shadow Spawn and all these White Cloaks, what does it look like for the Two Rivers going forward so that this doesn't happen again? I'm like, does Perrin just live there now? Is that just his home base?
He does at one point say something like, "I want the Shadow Spawn called the Aiel Waste the Dying Lands," And he's like, I aim for them to call this area the same or something like that, or something
Yeah,
worse.
yeah, it was
And I
cool.
was like, it was pretty cool. Yeah.
I also noticed that like Loyal, who we haven't talked about enough, and
Yeah.
I really love this character. I love
Yeah.
that he keeps
He's
turning up in
fun.
the way that he
He
does.
feels the most like a Robert Jordan insert to me. Like he's just Robert Jordan following him
Yeah.
around writing stuff in his book.
Awesome character. He's a writer.
Yeah,
He's definitely like noting everything. I was like, is this going to be at the end of this? Like these stories that we're reading was written by Loyal, like that kind of thing. Like maybe
It feels like it could
but,
be, yeah.
He's imposing too. Like I like that he like protected Fael and Perrin when he like saved her last book.
Yeah, saved some children, I think, during the attack on the Stone of Tyr. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he like the way that he can navigate through the ways, and then he takes the leaf from the inside and puts it on the outside, so nobody can come back through into Two Rivers and as well. And I'm like, all right, that's pretty intense. Like they're gonna, this is their last stand. I feel like over there. Yeah.
All right, let's move into the Aiel Waste. We got to talk about this section. So Rand uses a portal stone to transport Mat, Egwene, Moraine, and the Aiel at the Stone of Tyr from Tyr to the Aiel Waste, where Tardad and Shido Aiel are waiting for them. The Aiel Wise Ones have Moraine, Avienda, and Rand enter Rhuidean and allow Mat to go with Rand. All three enter the Terangriel in Rhuidean. Rand comes out with dragon markings on both arms, proving him to be he who comes with the dawn, or the Karakarn, which translates to the chief of chiefs of all of the Aiel. Mat goes into a doorway, Terangriel, which leads him to the land of the Eilfin. He comes out with gaps in his memory filled with those of men long dead, which also grant him fluency in the Old Tongue, which we've seen him starting to demonstrate here. He also has been gifted with a spear called a Shandari, if I'm saying that right, and a medallion. Rand finds that Mat has been hanged from the Tree of Life, but Rand was able to revive Mat. Okay, so that is just a rough overview of everything that happens. We also get a series of visions as Rand enters and goes through. And like I've read a ton about this stuff, and so I just want to like get your reactions to it and like what you kind of are taking away from it so far.
This was like you kind of talked about like what they went in and then they came out and like things were different. Yeah. This was a section where I was like intensely reading and listening at the same time. Yeah, it gets like really trying to pick up on all of this stuff, because like this stuff is like, this is like the lore background that we had a little bit of loose there, and I think it was the beginning of book 2 and maybe the beginning of
book 1. You're
But we've talked about in past episodes how like the Wheel of Time seems to like come back around, and there were things that were noting that looked like our world. And I was really picking up on how there's like future tech seemingly in some of these flashbacks.
Yeah. So did you track like what was actually happening with Rand and the visions he was seeing, like what those were?
So I think he went in to, and there was the other guy that was in there.
Yes, there was another Aiel who was also going through to try and like prove that should actually be the.
Then they were both seeing past the past of the Aiel.
Okay,
is what I gathered.
So I think this is of note, and it's something that I think you can miss, but I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. So what Rand is actually seeing is his ancestors.
Oh, okay. His specific ancestors.
These are his ancestors going back through time. So he's following back through his family tree.
So is that guy related to him as well? Because they weren't necessarily seeing the same thing.
That's the thing. We don't know what the other guy was seeing, but we assume maybe he's seeing through his own ancestors' eyes, and what is he seeing? But basically, he is still learning about the history of the Aiel,
which tied together into the history of like the breaking almost. Like it was like around the breaking, it seemed like. And that's what I'm saying. Like they were talking about like, what are they? I don't even know what they call it anymore, but they were like vehicles. The names of like vehicles
these like flying,
or devices.
These like flying vehicles.
Yeah.
There's shock lances or something, which we aren't described, but you're like, what is that?
Some kind of like,
so that's at the end. Because what happens is he goes through and he starts moving back farther and further in time. So at first it's just like a short while ago, but then each subsequent vision is further back in time. So it kind of works in that interesting way of like, oh, so we're getting reverse order. And like, if you don't realize that at first, that's one of the reasons it can be really disorienting, is you don't realize that what we're reading now precedes what we just read. And then this precedes what we just read. And then this precedes what we just read. You know what I mean? You have to kind of like figure out that that's what's happening.
And we got a bunch of visions, and like it wasn't until further down because there's a couple of chapters, and it wasn't until further in that I realized that I thought they were just random spots.
Yeah.
And then I started realizing that like, oh, they're connecting because of character names. Like they'd be like my son so and so,
right,
or my father.
And that's
whoever.
The connection that these are. Yeah. This is a bloodline thing.
And then I had to like recontextualize that. I also feel like I need to go back and read it again based on the fact that it's his ancestors.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. So that'll change things as well.
Honestly, I would recommend doing it because it's probably worth doing. It's a very weird section that is very important. So I think that's a totally solid thing to do.
But a lot of them were leaders, I noted. So that's tying it to Rand. Like that's kind of, in keeping or tracking with that. But yeah, it starts out, it's really interesting because it gets more advanced as it goes back. It's so crazy too, because I put a couple of things together that I'm guessing at, but he's going back. So we get like a generation back or however many generations back. And they are like the warriors that we know as the Aiel.
Mm-hmm.
And then like, as they go further back, we're seeing like different factions of Aiel. I think they're called like the Jazz or Jen.
Yeah. The Jen. Yeah.
Aiel.
I think it's the Jen.
They are like pacifists,
Right.
like Aiel. And it seems like they
Who does that
branched
sound like?
off. Right. Yeah. That's where I'm leading to, because they talk about the leaf thing.
Yeah.
That's
The way of the
how I put
leaf,
it
which
together.
is we know the Tinkers live by.
Exactly. So that was a huge revelation. I don't know for sure. Are we supposed to know? Like, are we supposed to walk away knowing that for sure? You think?
I think it's implied, and I think like you're onto it enough to where we can talk about it. The implication is that the Aiel were once one people who followed the way of the leaf and were pacifists, and then they got tasked with preserving a bunch of these Angriel and Sangriel by the Aes Sedai.
And we kept hearing that the Aiel had failed the Aes Sedai.
Yeah.
That was a big thing that we'd heard like multiple times up to this point.
Yeah. And so at some point there was this splintering where one group decided to take up arms and the other group decided to stay with the way of the leaf. And so the people that stayed with the way of the leaf, a lot of them died out, but it seems like the remnants of them might be the Tinkers now. And so we find out that basically the Tinkers are descendant from the same people as the Aiel, which is pretty crazy because the Aiel are the polar opposite of them. They go to the wastes and they embrace warfare as like a way of life, except they don't use swords. And that's another thing that is part of their like one hold on to the way of the leaf is that they don't use a sword because a sword is only a weapon and can't be used for anything else. Whereas like a spear can be used to like hold food in a cook fire or something. They say.
Fish or something,
Yeah.
So as they were moving back, I thought it was interesting too to note like they broke, and this is something I think we touched on when we met the Tinkers, is like this idea of pacifism and how that's like a great way of life until something else happens that like you can be taken advantage of is the point. And we see these characters as we go further and further back as they have the best intentions and they want to be pacifists, and then like your family gets taken. And then one guy, I forget who it is, he's like he won't go get his family, and so this woman takes up the spear and goes to like save her children.
Implication
and that's
that
like
this is the first maiden of the sphere, by the way.
Yeah, that's kind of what I got out of it.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so we're seeing in real time like how you can be a pacifist, but when push comes to shove, some people are going to react differently to different stimuli, like your family being taken and murdered and stuff.
But I like that he never like sells the way of the leaf as if it's like a foolish thing. Like some characters might think that, but I don't think Robert Jordan does. I think he has a lot of respect for this pacifist attitude and ideal, and he shows a lot of characters dying for it, but dying sort of like in like embracing their belief. I think he talks about like there was like a city where like these pacifists all died like linking arms and like singing or something, like because they refused to fight. But it's like it's kind of described as like a noble way to go because they were so committed to that way of life, that belief. Yeah.
Well, it is a noble belief, right? It's like the nonviolent path, and like in a perfect world, that would be like such a thing to strive for.
Yeah, and I like the Aiel have a bunch of respect for the Tinkers because of this, right?
Yeah,
for the people who follow the way of the leaf. Yeah.
So like we're going backwards, and so they're like the more violent kind of warriors that we're accustomed to. Then they branch off, and there's like one person who branches off, and we see like how that goes back to what we had just read, them being more violent. And then as we go further and further back, we're getting to this point where they're like, we're traveling with all these Angriel and stuff for the Aes Sedai, and then like we see the scene where like they're attacked, and some of them decide to some of them want to hang on to them, and the others are like, no, fuck that. All we care about is being pacifists. We don't care about these Angriels. They don't know what they are. They don't know they're Angriel. But they're like, we don't care about that stuff. And in that way, they failed the Aes Sedai, like we had talked about before. And we know the implication because we know what Angriel and Sangriel
yeah. I guess I should say that the Aiel who broke off and became fighters do have somewhat of a disdain for that pacifist way of life. I just think there's also a bit of respect at the same time, right? Because they know that they're from one people. And it's the wise ones in particular who have to go through this process to become wise ones. And so they have to like learn the history of their people. But not all the Aiel know this. or wise ones are maybe also like chieftains and stuff. But
Chief,
like
I
not,
think it's specifically the chiefs.
yeah, it's not like everybody knows this in the Aiel. A lot of it's secret actually from most Aiel.
Chronologically, this happens first, and then some of the Perrin stuff is happening. And I noticed that when Perrin was like, when we go into the White Cloaks camp to save the captured people, he's like, make sure you don't kill anybody because we don't want to like, you know, rattle any cages or whatever. Like just like take people out, knock them out, whatever. And then the Aiel that are with him are like kind of like, oh, cool. Like we like that kind of thing. Like something about like the way.
Well, we learn about their whole idea of honor, right? Because they have this whole thing of honor where if you can like touch somebody in a fight without killing them, they then owe you like a life debt and can become essentially an indentured servant to you for like a year and a day. It's part of their society, and that's their way to atone because they have this like honor debt that they sort of accrue. And one of the ways you can do that is by besting someone in a fight where you touch them with like a bare hand or something rather than like a weapon.
Rather than killing them.
Yeah. And so it's like there's all this honor around fighting, and like this whole notion of their honor system is so ingrained into their society and it's so built into their mores and, you know, taboos, as we just talked about. And that's something that our characters are having to navigate, right? Rand's learning about it for the first time. Egwene's learning about it for the first time. Avienda knows a lot of it too, so she can kind of like be someone who's on our side, but can kind of like help navigate the paths with dealing with these Aiel.
A couple of like major things that happen here though too. Like we get far enough back to where like technology is there, and I'm like, holy shit, this is crazy. It's like connecting back to like things that we are more familiar with in the modern day. And like they talk about Lews Therin, and like he had like a battle I think that he went off to do or something like that.
Tarmangaedon maybe some sort of like battle with the Dark One, and we hear about the boar basically happening, which like, I don't know how much of this is actually outlined, but this is all stuff I was reading about, and I'm sometimes it's hard to separate what was actually clear in the text. But
well, when they talked about the boar, immediately I assumed, because of the way that they were talking about like the power source.
Yeah,
or
whatever, supposedly they found this new version of the power that unites the male half and the female half.
And I was curious if this is the Eye of the World. Like I was curious if this is like where the seal happened in the Eye of the World and all that stuff. I don't know, but that was like a theory that I had. I was like, oh shit, have we seen?
Yeah, but so something happens with this, and like darkness spreads all over the world and into the sky, and there's like a big glowing orb, and like some crazy shit goes down. And this is like the final dream that goes back the farthest, right? I think it goes all the way back to the boar, I guess. And then I don't know. There's some wild history stuff that goes in there, because then you have the shattering, or I think it's called, or the breaking. The breaking, you know, the world basically broke, and then that's the end of the Age of Legends, where all this like technology was there.
But that was when Lews Therin like killed himself and his family and all that other stuff. So I know that like that all lines up in there somewhere. Like I think these are events leading up to the breaking. Almost.
The Forsaken get imprisoned at this moment too. This is all part of this time, right? When he like, because he like won the battle, but then didn't completely win, I guess. It's implication, because then he goes mad. Yeah, we're still learning how that all played out. But let's shift over to Matt while this is all going on. So Rand's having all these crazy visions. At the same time, Matt like does this thing where he like flips a coin about like whether or not he's going to go in. I think it's like whether or not he's going to go in with Rand.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and he flips the coin and it lands on its edge. He says that Rand is like channeling to control that to make it happen. But I don't know if Rand admits that that's what's happening. I don't know if that is what's happening, or if it's just like a crazy flip that happens because Matt's crazy luck.
I thought that he flipped it, crazy luck thing kind of happening where it was sitting there. And then I feel like Rand was like, yeah, right, you're not coming with me. And then he just channeled it to fall.
So he doesn't follow him in, but then that leaves him to instead go into these new doors, because he recognizes them and he thinks, these look like the same arches. I have unfinished business with these Aelfin. I want to go in and get some answers to my questions. Maybe I can go in with these new ones, even though he knows the rules say that he's not supposed to be able to go in again.
So at first I thought this was the same thing. I thought it was like, oh, it's the same people. Mm-hmm. Somehow he's able to get in. He's going to be able to ask more questions or whatever.
Right.
And then like, as it's going, he again kind of fumbles his way through this. It's a little better than last time, but he fumbles.
These ones they look like more like foxes. They seem to maybe be wearing leather made from human skin. Unclear.
I did not get that. That's crazy.
Something creepy. And then, he goes in and he sees several of them, and he like starts asking them all his questions again, and they have like no reaction to it. Like they literally don't say anything. And then he starts yelling a bunch of stuff at them. And then the next time we see him, he's hanging from a tree.
They said like, okay, cool. What else? Or something. Like they were like responding.
Yeah, they do react to eventually when he starts yelling at them and like making demands of them. Essentially, they start reacting to that.
And then they were like, and you didn't state the cost. And then I think they start choking him out or something, or he starts like kind of like not being able to breathe one way or another.
And then we
is how
see
it's
him hanging
described.
from the tree of life.
So they get him out there. I want to talk about that stuff, but one other thing before we move on from Rand stuff that I thought about that's important right now is one of the things that the Aiel back in the day that they were traveling with, that they held on to, that was important to them, was like these shards of the tree or whatever. I forget what it's called now. And they talk about how, and that keeps going back and back, and this is all tied together finally. Something that we heard about too is like the war, the Aiel war and everything like that. And like the guy, I forget his name right now, but there's a character that like there's this magical tree that like the Aiel have given, and he wants to turn it into a chair or something like that, like a throne. And he like cuts it down, and then
it's the Carians, right? Carians? And they ended up going to the war with them. Because he wants to make a throne out of it. Yeah,
that was the thing that they had to chase him down. And like the Aiel, they talk about how like the Aiel see it less as like a battle or like a war that happened, and more of like they were trying to assassinate this one guy, and like everything else was just casualties.
But like
the
we
way.
know that all the other people consider it like this war. Yeah.
And so then we find out like that I don't know why the tree is important, but they wanted to carry, like, even through all the other Ongriel and all the other things that they clearly ended up having all these Ongriel, the different types, end up in this plot that they're in right now, that Rand and Matt are in right now. Yeah,
there's a bunch of them there.
And there's the tree there too. So seemingly like they were told to like find safety.
It was like the only city made in the Aiel Waste, and it's unclear if it was ever even lived in, and it's like a bunch of palaces, and now it's surrounded by some sort of magic. We didn't really talk about it in like a fog. It's a mysterious like old city ruins, full of all these magic items.
To the old Aiel, they were like, find somewhere safe. So they were kind of just like a wandering band of people that became warriors eventually. And seems like they found the safety in this area, and the fog went all over it, so it's like kind of hidden from the world. And then that's when we get into Rand's in these like clear pillar things, like he walks into, and then Matt is in here. He's asking for all these wishes. We find out their wishes, and then when he comes out, he's got a fucking magical weapon.
Yeah.
just like Rand.
And a
Everybody's
mysterious
gonna
medallion
get
that we don't know much about yet.
Yeah, I have no idea what that does. They just said that it was like a medallion.
Yeah.
But the weapon that Matt has now too, I'm like, all right, that's a super cool weapon. I'm like, it's like a pole arm.
Got ravens on it or something, or crows or something, and it's like engraved, and it's black handled, and it's got this like it's like a spear, but it's got like a sword blade on the end of it.
Right, I forget what they call that. There's a name for it.
Yeah, it's some sort of polearm weapon, like bardache, halberd, something like that.
But it's cool. It kind of fits his character. I like that he got that. I think it's interesting to note that it had ravens on it, like you said. Mm-hmm. Like we've been talking about ravens a little bit.
Yeah, maybe a little redemption for the ravens.
That was wild too. And then he's hanging, and Rand comes out of his around the same time, and he like cuts him down, and then they get in this big fight.
And he basically is dead, and he has to resurrect him, essentially, bring him back with like CPR, essentially, right, and the power. I think basically CPR though, and so I don't know. Is that maybe him having to die and then live again? Is that maybe fulfill that part of the prophecy?
That's one of the prophecies that we heard about. Yeah.
So maybe that one's already been filled now. But and like we're just starting to see any differences with Matt. I think it was a little bit spoilery to say that his like memory has been filled in, because I think that's something that starts to play out over the rest of the book. But we're already starting to see some of that before this is what's weird, because it's not like there's a clear delineation where this is all happening now. This has already begun to happen.
Yeah, I just feel like the three things that he asked for, we know are one of the things that he kept asking for is like he wanted to fill his memories in.
Fill in his memories, escape from the Aes Sedai control.
Yeah, can't remember the third one, but
we've probably even talked about it already, but I'm drawing a blank on it now. Yeah,
I think the main thing too is like whether he has his memories back or not. Those people were like, you didn't name a cost, so there's going to be some drawback. I think for each of the things. One of them being they almost killed him or they tried to strangle him or whatever. He asked for 3 wishes. I assume there'll be 3 kind of like drawbacks. And going forward, it'll be interesting to track like what memories are we talking about? Are we talking about because he didn't specify, right? And that's the funny thing about Wheel of Time, because it's like it's all connected.
Yeah.
So it's like, is he going to get memories from past lives? Could be.
Yeah.
Probably, if I was to guess, because he's already started to get a little bit of that, like we talked about last week.
Yeah, he has been starting to get some of that. He could speak the old tongue. Like, it says he can speak the old tongue fluently after this, but he already kind of could, because they're all talking in old tongue, and he doesn't have to have a translator.
Yeah, and he was speaking in tongues as they were like pulling the blade off of him and stuff. At the healing the Aes Sedai were doing to him and stuff. Like it seems like he's already got
something that's happening. It's interesting. Yeah, man. There's so many little things that happen that I'm sure we're glossing over, but we want to keep this a manageable length, so I think it's probably time to wrap this up. But man, what a cool book. I reading this one, I'm like, okay, this is what I love about Wheel of Time. In my opinion, this is the best. We haven't finished the book, obviously, but like I feel like this is my favorite that we've read so far easily. And I think going forward, we're entering into my favorite run of books in the series. I think the next.
That's really exciting.
I really love these books. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you've had such a journey with them too, because like you were a fan as they were coming out. It seems like for the most part too.
Well, I mean, like when I first started reading them, it probably would have been like, I don't know, like 98, 99 when I was in like middle school. And so like more than this were out. We're probably up to like book 7 or something, where we're probably already out when I started into the series.
It's cool to see like that, like, you still have an affection for the stories and that they're still resonating today.
Yeah, it's very nostalgic for me. Yeah, I can see the flaws, but like I still really enjoy this series. I'm loving it. I'm curious to see what they do in the show, which, by the way, that's going to be our next episode. We're gonna do the first 5 episodes of the show. And we will be finishing it out in a subsequent episode. But we wanted to like get into the show without having everything finished, and see what they're doing, man. And that's what we do on the show. We compare adaptations, and it feels like we haven't done that in a little bit because we've been reading, but it's gearing up so that we'll be ready when we watch the show and we can give our reactions and our thoughts on what they're doing. It seems like we have a ton of material now that we've just covered that they could adapt. So yeah, really curious to see what they do with that. If you are enjoying our coverage of the Wheel of Time, thank you for listening. And you could let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, very important. And if you're willing, do that little bell thing so that it tells you whenever we post a new video. That would be very helpful as well. And I think it helps us in the algorithm. So yeah, we appreciate that kind of support.
And be sure to connect with us on all other social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok. We're all over the place, all of those at Ink to Film.
If you want to. You don't have to. But like, we'd love to have, it's just a way that we can actually connect with our listeners. So we would love to have that if you're interested.
Not to mention it helps you see what we're posting.
Right.
But anyway, we also have a Discord server. If you want access to that, send us an email at inktofilm@gmail.com or a message on any of those social media platforms. And what we do in there is we talk about like most recent episodes, like any of the material that we're covering, or just books, movies, video games, anything in general.
Yeah.
A lot of people send their pets and
stuff. It's
stuff.
a way to connect. It's cool.
A lot of fun. Yeah.
We also have a Patreon, which I know we have all this stuff, but our Patreon is very important too because we do bonus episodes on there, which we come out with monthly. We also have polls on there that are dedicated to our patrons where you can affect what we cover. So if you want us to cover something in particular, that's going to be your best way to do it. Patreon.com/inktofilm. We have different tiers on there, but the lowest one is just $2, and that gives you voting abilities and it gives you the ability to get bonus episodes. So that's the one you're going to want to look at if you're just looking to get your foot in the door. We'd love to have you. All right, man, that's going to be it for this week. I'm so excited to watch this show now. I'm geared up. I'm ready to go. My head is full of Wheel of Time. I'm talking about bloody ashes and all the different fun ways they have of swearing in this book series. Man, I don't know. I'm ready.
I can't wait. Yeah. I mean, there's so many things that we talked about this week that like I'm so excited to learn more about. I can't wait to finish this book and to watch the series. So yeah, looking forward to it.
All right. Until next time.
Keep adapting.